It was one of the largest projects in the history of mankind. The Third Reich's bomb-proof factories. Germany's Wunderwaffen were to bring death and destruction to its enemies. Gigantic underground plants would have kept the supply chain running for the Wehrmacht. Armaments Minister Albert Speer had devised a monstrous plan for his Führer. Today, only few may set foot in the remnants of the mammoth project. Hundreds of millions of Reichsmarks were spent in order to hollow out entire mountains. Production plants for weapons essential to the war effort were to be built in underground tunnel systems. Hundreds of thousands of slave laborers had to toil for the ambitious plans of the Nazis. The number of those who lost their lives is uncertain. Up until the last day of the war, work in the tunnels went on feverishly. Yet how close had the Nazis come to accomplishing their outrageous project? What would have happened if the underground armament production had run successfully? Would Hitler's war of annihilation have claimed millions more victims? A slope close to the Bavarian town of Oberammergau. Here, one of the mysterious tunnel systems laid out by the Nazis is hidden from the eyes of the inquisitive. The only entrance is blocked with a concrete seal. Only the state-appointed geologist may open it. Every few years, he has to make sure that everything inside is intact. Heinz Raber is responsible for about 20 subterranean tunnel systems in southern and eastern Germany. He has to test whether the installations which were built 60 years ago are still safe. After the end of the war, the Americans went into the tunnels in Oberammergau and searched through everything. Since then, the tunnels have stood empty. The wooden lining is rotten, and stones may come loose from the roof at any time.
During the war, the plant belonged to Messerschmitt AG. It served as a bomb-proof production and development plant for the aircraft construction. According to the plans, there were 3 or 4 portals. We've opened one. The others were all blasted at the end of the war. Here we have 2 parallel tunnels of about 80 or 90 meters in length, connected by cross-sections. They were used as bomb-proof production plants.
The Allies knew of 340 underground construction sites even before the end of the war. Over 400 had been given code names during the Third Reich, and the plans of the Ministry of Armaments pointed to some 800 plants. The Nazi leadership had hesitated for some time before it decreed the excavation of subterranean factories. Only in the summer of 1943, when the air raids of Allied bomber squadrons became increasingly destructive, did Hitler's armament minister Albert Speer give the command to systematically transfer the war production underground. Initially, the industry rejected the idea, although the outrageous costs were borne by the government. The plans appear to be incomplete and their implementation too chaotic. At first, the Nazis had existing mines expanded. One of the first projects was realized at the end of 1943 on the bank of the Neckar River. Codename Neustadt. 120 meters deep, under the vineyard slopes, a gigantic subterranean tunnel system still lies here, out of sight. Initially, the mines in Neckarzimmern had been extracting gypsum for over 150 years. During World War I, they housed a dynamite factory, and from 1937, they were used to store ammunition. Whether the workers' latrines date from World War II is uncertain, as this tunnel system is one of the few that are still in use. The Iron Gate opens into a subterranean town. The mountainside is hollowed out by a road network 34 kilometers long. A gigantic arms forge was to be built here on an area of 130,000 square meters. It was partly put into operation in the spring of 1944. Today, the facility covers a total area of 170,000 square meters. Some units of the German armed forces are stationed in Neckarzimmern.
Two plants were transferred here during World War II. The production of ammunition casing of a nearby ammunition factory and a ball bearing production plant from a factory that was initially situated in Schweinfurt. When the army began to expand this installation in 1957, Europe was in the political crisis of the Cold War. Because of the threat of possible confrontation, facilities were sought that would also be nuclear bomb-proof in order to be able to store high-grade valuable parts and to continue the necessary repairs even under aggravated conditions of war.
Entsprechende Instandsetzungsarbeiten weitergeführt werden können, auch unter den verschärften Bedingungen eines hier stattfindenden Krieges.
720 people work underground here, providing supplies and repair parts for the army. The maintenance of the plant cost the German Ministry of Defense 1.6 million euros annually.
Our job these days in this underground facility is to repair and store for safekeeping sensitive materials, particularly materials which are worth being guarded. The greatest advantage here is that we have special climatic conditions, in variable air temperature and humidity, so that there is little effort involved in preserving and packaging.
Sodass wir also einen sehr geringen Aufwand in der Bereich Konservierung und Verpackung haben.
In addition, because of the few access points and ventilation shafts, the plant is also very easy to guard, so the number of guards necessary is comparably small for this gigantic installation.
Diese sehr großdimensionierte Anlage vergleichsweise gering ist.
In the same tunnels where materials are stored for the German peace missions in Kosovo and Afghanistan today, weapons of war were to be produced 60 years ago. The expansion of the tunnel system would have cost at least 50 million Reichsmarks. Only half of the project was completed by the end of the war. The ball bearing factories in Schweinfurt in particular were the target of the Allied bomber raids. In spite of heavy losses, the Americans succeeded in razing the factories to the ground. Their main goal, however, namely to paralyze the production of supplies for Hitler's Wehrmacht, was not achieved at that stage. Up to 80% of the key war industries were to be moved underground. Along with the ball bearing factories, these were the production plants for aircraft engines, fuel tanks, and the secret missile program of the SS. Only about 20% of these projects were put into operation. Installations that were considered essential for the war effort were well camouflaged in order to become invisible to the Allied reconnaissance planes. For instance, the gigantic fuel tanks of Nazi Germany were bunkered underground from as early as the mid-1930s. One such tank near Bremen is still in operation over 60 years later. The state-owned installations must be maintained regularly. Only trained personnel can descend into the tanks. Each of the 80 gigantic tanks holds 4,000 cubic meters of fuel. They're made of 12mm thick shipbuilding steel with a 1-meter thick concrete jacket. Everywhere in the Third Reich, the underground construction work was given the highest priority.
Die Absicht der Feinde, durch planmäßigen und massierten Bombenwurf die deutsche Rüstung zu zerschlagen, ist gescheitert. Rechtzeitig und mit deutscher Gründlichkeit wurden kriegsentscheidende Fertigungen unter die Erde verlagert.
This propaganda film is called Weapons, Hands, Hearts. It contains rare footage of the subterranean construction sites. These scenes were shot in Kala, in Thuringia, where an aircraft factory was to be built. Codename Lax. It was mostly foreign slave laborers who had to do the dirty work in the tunnels, under inhuman conditions.
On our first day, we were divided into groups. A German officer made his speech and told us, "You will work until you drop dead." 3 people had to drill holes in the tunnels, another 3 shoveled, and 1 took out the full tippers. We stood on a scaffold and drilled huge holes into the roof, 2.5 to 3 meters deep, which were filled with dynamite. Then they blasted it, and we had to get back to work and start shoveling immediately afterwards. We could not even see one another in all the dust and gases, but they were merciless. We had to carry on.
After their grueling 12-hour shift, the tens of thousands of slave laborers were given a frugal food ration. At the beginning of February 1945, even 14 to 16-year-olds were assigned to Kala in order to help with the construction.
From a technical viewpoint, the concept was rationally thought out and essential, considering the air supremacy of the Allies over Germany. But the means to realize it was sheer madness, of course.
Die Methoden waren natürlich die des hellen Wahnsinns. The
engine had to be kept running at full steam, although it was foreseeably speeding towards disaster, namely the end of the 1,000-year Reich. And the cruelties that took place was something that is beyond the understanding of a normal thinking and feeling human being.
Die dann vollzogen wurden noch, kann man eigentlich als normal denkender und fühlender Mensch nicht mehr nachvollziehen.
Die deutsche Führung verkündete, der deutsche Himmel muss und wird wieder freigekämpft werden. Unsere Erfinder und Konstrukteure werden der Masse der feindlichen Terrorbomber Flugzeuge entgegenwerfen, die in Abwehr und Angriff unbedingt siegen werden.
One of the most closely guarded new weapons of the Luftwaffe was manufactured in Kala, the jet fighter Me-262. The first aircraft was ready for takeoff in mid-February 1945.
The jet fighter looked like a fish. It was ultra-modern, very slim and presumably very fast. We'd heard some rumors that the plan was to build 1,200 fighters here every month. We just couldn't believe that. But it happened before our eyes. We were all terrified because it was obvious that if the war lasted any longer, we would not survive.
These aerial photos of Kala were taken by the US Air Force in 1945. The bunkered entrances and the freight lift at the side of the mountain are clearly discernible. Inside the mountain, the Nazis planned to build a total of 30 kilometers of passageways. At the end of the war, almost half this distance had been blasted through the rock. The tunnels that were not lined led into the actual heart of the plant. 4 gigantic subterranean halls covering 27,000 square meters, where the manufacturing was to take place.
We are in one of the huge halls which they were planning to use for the assembly of the jet fighters, the Me-262. Here the fighter was put together and then transported above ground through this large cross-section of the tunnel. Then it was hoisted up the mountain by means of an elevator, and from there it would take off.
Above the totally excavated mountain ridge, the Germans had apparently laid out a runway for this purpose. The serial production of the jet planes was only a question of time. As it happened, only few of them ever took off from there.
I remember 2 takeoffs of Me-262s. We were working outside and were able to see the sloping elevator as well as what was happening above ground. We all looked up and some were already pointing at the horizon, and then we saw this strange aircraft flying incredibly fast. One could really say that the Me-262 was another wonder weapon.
The Nazi leadership had placed great hopes on the potential of the new wonder weapon. Ultimately, however, even the state-of-the-art jet fighter was largely ineffective against the superiority of the Allied air combat forces. Up until the end of the war, hundreds of thousands of internees were transferred from the concentration camps in the east to the Reich in order to build new aircraft factories within a few months. Max Mannheimer came from Auschwitz to Mühldorf, a town by the Inn River, in February 1945.
We knew that a subterranean factory was to be built there, and we also knew that the reason for that was because the armament plants above ground were all being bombed. They decided to transfer everything under the surface of the earth. Here, for example, there should have been 3 stories underground and 3 stories above. To me, it seemed like ancient Egypt and the building of the pyramids. A lot of people running back and forth, driven by overseers, because it was a project that had to be finished very quickly.
A 5-meter thick and 400-meter long roof made of reinforced concrete would form a vault over the production halls. Some 2,000 inmates lost their lives during its construction.
The main jobs were digging, carrying iron and carrying cement. That was actually the worst command and also the most feared. The SS doctors at the time calculated that an inmate who did this job, and if he performed as he was expected to do, had a life expectancy of 60 to 80 days. And this calculation proved to be quite accurate.
When the war ended, Max Mannheimer's body weight was 37 kilos. Many of his fellow laborers did not live to see the liberation. Crammed in freight trains, they were evacuated from Mühldorf and other camps and taken to Dachau. The pictures of the dead, but also those of the survivors, shocked the free world. In a forest northeast of Nuremberg, there is another hidden portal to a tunnel, usually sealed by a concrete wall. Mining engineers have opened it in order to carry out some maintenance work. The Doggerwerk near Hersbruck is one of the biggest subterranean constructions built by the Nazis. Even today, the people in the surrounding villages in the Franconian Alb do not know how large the mysterious tunnel system in the mountain really is. The tunnels were lined in parts, but evidently never used. Once a year, Heinz Raber inspects the installation. Especially during the winter, tunnel parts cave in and must be repaired, a job which requires a lot of effort. The mining expert is well aware of how dangerous working underground is, particularly in the sections that had not been reinforced by the Nazis. Loosened blocks of stone can fall at any time.
We're now leaving the lined tunnel sections and entering the unlined ones. As you can see here, it's all sandstone without support, and the greatest risk is that piles of sandstone come loose from the roof and fall and cause depressions that can reach as far as and be seen from above ground.
The Nazis gave this installation the code name Escher 1.
We're now coming into a heading to the point where this tunnel should have been driven forward. You can see here that the boreholes for blasting, these black dots, had already been made. And if you're lucky, you can also find explosive cartridges in the boreholes next to the drill rods, like this one here, which is an original, that are still embedded in the stone. Here is one such cartridge. So the boreholes were loaded, ready to be blasted. It all stopped abruptly. They left everything behind, just as it was.
Over 9,000 inmates from the Flossenburg concentration camp were forced to work here under appalling conditions, so that the tunnels were excavated as quickly as possible. Some 3,500 of them died.
From the planned 100,000 square meters of area, only about 15,000 were completed. The excavations should have been continued in this direction, as you can see from these so-called drifts. These galleries are all 20 meters apart from one another and would have been used as production plants. The excavation works on this tunnel system began in March 1944 and continued up until May 1945. Approximately 7.5 kilometers of tunnels were dug. Parts of them, about 10%, had already been lined with concrete, while the rest is still unsupported. This underground installation was to be used for the production of BMW aircraft engines. And the aim was to transfer the manufacturing plant from above ground to a bomb-proof underground site.
The slave laborers blasted and removed 500,000 cubic meters of Dogger sandstone from the mountainside. Yet aircraft engines were never built here. By order of the American occupying power, the portals to the tunnel system were walled up after the war, and the abandoned plant fell into oblivion. Every now and again, former concentration camp inmates come here in order to commemorate their murdered companions. There was one new type of weapon on which the Nazi leadership pinned their hopes, that would bring a decisive turn in the course of the war. In the propaganda jargon of the Third Reich, it was called V2. V stood for vengeance. Missile engineer Wernher von Braun had developed in Peenemünde a new ballistic missile of the type A4 to a stage where it was ready for production. With the V2, the Nazis wanted to bomb targets in England and thus terrorize the British civilian population. Despite numerous unsuccessful launch attempts, the V2 was operational in the summer of 1944. An inconspicuous mountain ridge in the Harz region. In mid-April 1945, American troops advanced to the town of Nordhausen. In the shadows of the Kornstein mountain, they found a concentration camp with emaciated inmates and many corpses. Here, survivors of the Mittelbau-Dora camp report to their liberators details of mysterious tunnels in the mountain and a top-secret missile factory where they had to work as slave laborers of the SS. Yet the victors had long known that one of the most important arms forges of the Third Reich was here. After the British carried out a devastating bomb raid on the Peenemünde plant, the Nazis quickly transferred the missile production to an already existing underground fuel tank in August 1943. Concentration camp inmates had to begin excavating immediately, under the cruelest of conditions.
Die 10.000 Häftlinge
The 10,000 inmates were put up in 4 cross-cut connecting chambers of the tunnel system, which meant that they slept where they had to work. They were totally inadequately dressed for the conditions they faced here below ground. They just wore their thin striped prisoners' uniforms in the cold, and the air was very humid. This, of course, quickly resulted in the spreading of pulmonary diseases, and it was no surprise that many of the 3,000 fatalities during the first 5 months were caused by tuberculosis and other lung diseases. All the others died of exhaustion, starvation, or froze to death, but also from maltreatment by the SS and the civilian employees of the plant.
Und nicht zu schweigen von den Misshandlungen durch SS-Personal, aber auch durch zivile Angestellte des Mittelwerkes.
The 250,000 square meter tunnel system in Kornstein is largely closed today. Being in the unlined tunnels is extremely dangerous. Only the men of the Mines Safety Authority go in periodically to inspect the plant. However, treasure or souvenir hunters often attempt to enter the tunnels illegally, as original pieces from the mountain where the missiles were built are very sought after by collectors. Peter Wolf was brought to Mittelbau-Dora from Auschwitz. As a Jewish inmate, he was given the camp number 105065. His memories are so dreadful that he does not want to enter the tunnels again.
We were inmates in the camp at Nordhausen. A train took us every morning and drove us to the tunnels. We were considered the death commando, and people called us that too. Working outside was somewhat easier, if you can use that word, compared to inside, because inside one was under constant SS supervision, and people were beaten all the time. The inmates before us never saw daylight. They were in the tunnels 24 hours a day. They slept, ate and worked underground. The conditions were murderous, and the brutality of the SS beyond description. A lot of people died in there.
These memories demonstrate the unspeakable suffering of the slave laborers. Today, the interior of the mountain is still littered with debris. It's almost unimaginable that an entire factory was once in operation here. The Armament Ministry had assigned 200 million Reichsmarks for the creation of a gigantic subterranean industrial area of 600,000 square meters in total. The production of the V-missiles was at its core. 1,000 rockets were to be produced per month, according to the ambitious plan. In April 1944, the output was 450, and even this number was rarely achieved, as the production seldom ran smoothly.
Es war keine normale Fabrik
It was
insofern.
not an ordinary factory, in the sense that the product which was being manufactured was not ready to go into mass production. Almost on a daily basis, Peenemünde, the development plant of the A4 missile, would send orders to alter the production process, and these modifications were then adapted into production here. As a result, more than half of the rockets produced were not fully operational.
funktionsbereit waren.
Rare color pictures taken by Hitler's cameraman Walter Frenz. Under the instructions of German technicians, selected prisoners put the missiles together from some 45,000 component parts. The assembled V2s were taken to Tunnel 41 for the final inspection. The 15-meter-tall testing tower is almost completely underwater today. From here, the missiles were loaded onto freight trains and transported to the launching sites in northern Germany and occupied Holland. After the end of the war, first the British and then the Americans collected everything that could be of use from the plant. Then the Soviets came and took whatever was left. Yet in Tunnel 29, relics of the underground missile production can still be found. Jet engines and other parts rust away in the water. They are the last remnants of the insane idea to transfer most of the Third Reich's armament production under the earth. Whether the deployment of a great number of operational missiles would have influenced the outcome of the war is questionable. In Kornstein, however, their production plant was almost unassailable.
The Allies had extensive and detailed information about what was happening here, chiefly through the evaluation of aerial reconnaissance photos. For example, they'd located and knew exactly where the ventilation shafts were in Kornstein, and they thought long and hard about whether they could drop phosphorus or other incendiary bombs into the shafts in order to bombard the underground factory and render it obsolete.
Die Untertageanlage zu bombardieren und unbrauchbar zu machen.
US Army footage from April 12, 1945. The whole horror of the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp revealed itself to the liberators after a British bomb raid had heavily damaged the Bulka death camp. This was where the emaciated SS slaves were brought to die. Annihilation through work.
Somehow you get used to seeing dead people all around you. Early every morning, each block had to report for roll call. Everyone had to be counted, even those who had died during the night, so we had to lay them on one side. We were always happy to survive the day. I'm often asked, why did you not offer any resistance to the SS troopers? And I always reply, if we were still alive by the evening, we had offered enough resistance the whole day.
Wir bringen die ersten Aufnahmen von V2 auf ihrem Flug nach England. Sie wurden aus Gründen der Geheimhaltung aus größerer Entfernung gemacht und geben nur einen schwachen Begriff vom wirklichen Größenverhältnis der V2. In rasender Geschwindigkeit steigt der schlanke Stahlleib in die Stratosphäre.
The chief destination of the destructive weapon was London. On September 7, 1944, the first V2 struck at the heart of the British capital. Tens of thousands more would follow. At least that was what the Nazi leadership was planning. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels gloated. The first successful strikes of V2 missiles were unscrupulously exploited on the home front.
Ich habe damals nach den schweren Angriffen auf die Reichshauptstadt in Berlin erklärt, es wird die Stunde kommen, wo wir das den Engländern heimzahlen werden. Die englische Presse hat mich am anderen Tag auf das Massivste angegriffen und die höhnische Frage aufgeworfen, ob die neue Waffe die ich dort angekündigt hätte, etwa im Propagandaministerium statt im Rüstungsministerium erfunden worden wäre. Ich habe es damals nicht für meine Aufgabe gehalten, die Engländer eines Besseren zu belehren, sondern ich war im Gegenteil der Überzeugung, je länger sie glauben, dass sie nicht kommt, umso besser ist es. Denn die Überraschung ist auch eine Waffe.
Initially, the Nazi leaders had planned to launch the V missiles from gigantic launching bunkers. In May 1943, construction of a concrete colossus 40 meters wide and 75 meters long began in Verdun in northern France. The German engineers believed that the 5-meter thick reinforced concrete roof was impenetrable. British bombers proved them wrong in the summer of 1944. The incomplete base was severely damaged by bombs and became useless for launching V missiles. The interior of the mammoth installation was converted after the raid and was used for the production of fuel. A true-to-scale model of the V2 reminds us today of the original purpose of the plant. From the Wehrmacht's viewpoint, the destruction of Verdun was a tactical error on the part of the Allies, as the bombing led to new launch possibilities being considered. The missiles, according to the plans supported by Professor von Braun, should be launched from a number of mobile ramps. These easily camouflaged launching sites could not be identified in time by the enemy. It would be difficult for Allied bomber pilots to locate and destroy such targets.
Oh yeah, we knew all about the danger of this. The V2s, especially when they started coming, they used to blow those off from France, and they would come down somewhere in England. This is rather pretty horrifying, really. For people who obviously knew more about it, like for instance Churchill, it was crucial because he was thinking about morale as well. Whereas to us, of course, it was merely another job. We realised the importance of it and to get on with it and do the job, but we had nothing about the far-reaching implications of it.
The 617th Squadron of the Royal Air Force, also called the Dam Busters, was put into action every time British intelligence had identified military point targets, such as the launching sites of V-rockets. In the northern French town of Verdun stands perhaps the most spectacular subterranean bunker built by the Nazis. From here, the vengeance weapons would be launched in great numbers. The locals call the gigantic roof construction La Coupole, the dome. Inside, the missiles would be fitted with warheads in an assembly line style of production. According to the plans of the Nazis, the operational missiles would then be transported to a former quarry and be launched immediately. The storage capacity was 500 missiles. Starting from an old quarry, thousands of slave laborers had to blast open kilometers of tunnels into the mountain under inhuman conditions. The concrete dome was 5 meters thick and weighed 55,000 tons. It would form a protective vault over the heart of the unit. The excavation work in the interior had begun. Here the missiles were to be uprighted for the final assembly, the fitting of the warheads. The octagonal hall is 13 meters high. Yet not long after construction had begun, the Brits heard about the plant and ordered the dam busters to destroy it.
It was important, in fact, that we knocked it down before it started sending all these dreadful things over to us. We were thoroughly briefed because we were told everything they knew about them. The whole idea of it as well was to undermine targets. So it had a dual effect. If you've got a direct hit, it will blow the place up and blow it completely to smithereens. And at the same time, it would undermine all the foundations.
British military engineers had developed a special type of bomb for this purpose. The 12,000-pound tall boys could penetrate through meters of solid concrete. On July the 17th, 1944, these bombs were used to attack Verdun. Although the planes of the 617th Bomber Squadron did not manage to land a direct strike on the dome, the entire plant became ineffective after the raid.
Well, we get the information because the photo aeroplanes came back. Almost immediately they were over there and they got the photo and they'd come back and we would be told how successful the raid was and also, you know, if you had to go again. Because with tall boys, you normally didn't have to go again if it was successful, see.
11 days prior to that, the dam busters had also attacked Mimoyek, a small village just a few kilometers away from the Channel coast, to the south of Calais. By command of Nazi armament minister Speer, the building of another subterranean plant had begun here in the summer of 1943, for the production of a weapon which was to reach London directly, just like the V2. One single tall boy bomb was enough to end Hitler's dream of the so-called England cannon. The bomb broke through the 6-meter-thick concrete roof and exploded inside the mountain. Slave laborers had blasted 100-meter-long shafts diagonally into the mountain to accommodate entire batteries of new high-pressure pumps. These cannons, also called V3 or Busy Lizzies, were supposed to fire shells to distances of up to 200 kilometers. It's not clear which kind of shells the England cannon was to fire at a speed of 1 kilometer per second. Theories exist that mention biological or chemical weapons, but there's no evidence to support them. After the successful bombing raid, the installation was useless but not completely destroyed. Today, a few of the 60-year-old tunnels are still accessible. A model of the so-called millipede reminds us of the magnitude of the plan the Nazis tried to achieve here. The threat for England had obviously been so great, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill concerned himself with Mimoyek for 8 months after the liberation of France. He could not allow this installation to pose a threat to the safety of the country, he wrote in a confidential memorandum. As a result, the V3 shafts that were not destroyed in the raid were blasted by British engineers. Did Churchill know more about the plans of the Nazis than is known today? An obsolete railway track leads into no man's land. Falkenhagen, southeast of Berlin. British records concerning this small place in Brandenburg's countryside are partly classified to this day. The reason is that here was to be produced one of the most dangerous weapons of mass destruction in the history of war.
Unter Gas verstehen wir jene Erzeugnisse der chemischen Industrie, die als chemische Kampfstoffe bei Kampfhandlungen eingesetzt werden können, mit dem Ziel, auf den Gegner einzuwirken und ihn kampfunfähig zu machen. So hat sich die chemische Waffe von Hunderten von Geistern und Kräften geschmiedet, schon im Ersten Weltkrieg zu einem wirkungsvollen Kampfinstrument entwickelt. Wir müssen daher auch im gegenwärtigen Völkerringen jederzeit mit ihrem Einsatz durch den Gegner rechnen.
A Wehrmacht instructional film. The effects of the toxic substances mustard gas and hydrocyanic acid were demonstrated on living objects. Great Britain, the United States and the Soviet Union stockpiled large amounts of these warfare agents during the Second World War. Nazi Germany also had some 55,000 tons. Yet these lethal gases were not used. The memories of the terrors caused by the use of gas in the First World War were too dreadful. Dr. Hoffman, a physicist and former member of the GDR's Academy of Sciences, has been investigating the history of Falkenhagen for decades. In 1938, the military had built the unit in a large, densely forested area to protect it from inquisitive eyes. Under the codename Seewerk, scientists here developed mostly incendiary substances. Incomplete parts of buildings testify to a project which was started here in 1944. The Army Supreme Command had made the grounds available to IG Farben. The chemical concern was to produce a completely new chemical warfare agent. 44 million Reichsmarks were apportioned for the construction. A gigantic thermal power station was already structurally complete. The chemists had already transferred their labs to Falkenhagen.
There was a new process development, and that was the nerve agent Sarin. This warfare agent was to be produced in a large plant here in Falkenhagen. Sarin mainly affects the respiratory system. The concentration of one droplet which evaporates into a cubic meter of air is sufficient, and when one comes into contact with this agent, death by respiratory failure will result within 6 minutes.
Innerhalb von 6 Minuten bei schlagendem Herzen erstickt. Die Atmung wird außer Gefecht gesetzt.
The traditional chemical weapons that were known at the time would have been recognized by the soldiers on both sides. The use of protective gas masks was practiced over and over again. Sarin, however, was different. One could neither see it nor smell or taste it. With Sarin, death came with no warning. It's said that Hitler had forbidden the use of gas because he'd almost lost his eyesight after a gas attack during the First World War. At the same time, however, he personally ordered the production of Sarin. Would he have had the nerve to use this new weapon if it had been available? With a month's production of Sarin, the Nazis would have been able to eradicate the population of a city as large as London. When the Red Army reached the borders of the Third Reich at the beginning of 1945, the German chemists in Falkenhagen packed up their equipment and left. Nothing should give the victors any clues about their plans. Sarin was never produced here. The Soviet conquerors used the production tract for breeding pigs.
After the war, people were rendered speechless when they realized the disastrous potential of what was in preparation here. This chemical warfare agent was a purely German invention and was totally unknown to the Allies. 500 tons monthly is a vast amount, and with artillery shells or bombs, one could have exterminated whole areas. With such a weapon, one does not distinguish between civilians and soldiers.
An 80-meter-long subterranean duct is what remains of the semi-finished filling plant for Sarin. IG Farben had announced that production could commence in the summer of 1945. How realistic that was can no longer be established today. American tank units advancing into Austria in early May 1945. The sorry remains of the Wehrmacht had surrendered to the superiority of the Allies and become prisoners of war. Footage from the end of the war near Salzburg, filmed by a cameraman of the US Army. On May the 8th, 2 days after the Ebensee concentration camp was liberated by the Americans, war correspondents documented the suffering of the survivors. Concentration camp inmates and slave laborers from Ebensee have been toiling in an SS secret tunnel system close to the camp, codename Cement. Today, a diesel locomotive drives into the mountain once a day in order to remove the lime that is mined there. 60 years ago, the Nazis expropriated the family business and gave it to the SS for the production of the most spectacular new development in the field of military engineering. The plant was never put into operation. However, especially in the former Tunnel A, the initial purpose can still be identified. The halls in which intercontinental missiles were to be assembled under the supervision of SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler are 30 meters high. The newest missile model, the 26-meter-tall A9, was supposed to have a strike range that would reach as far as the USA, according to the ambitious plans of the Nazis. 20 such rockets would be built monthly in Ebensee. The A9 project did not even reach the testing stage. Its inventor, Wernher von Braun, was taken to the USA without further questioning after the end of the war, where he continued his missile research for his new masters. The precise number of the victims of his work while in Hitler's service is unknown.